So what's up again there, guys? Brian here, the 3 Topics Gamer, here to share with you another one of my requested top 5 list videos to share with you guys today. Now, there are several video game developers that kind of like to milk out their franchise to make as much money as possible, and then there are certainly some developers that may create a very successful video game, but it just, for one reason or another, just wasn't financially successful to deserve a sequel. However, for this particular list, I'm going to go over 5 games that I absolutely do believe deserve a sequel. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, before I start, if you happen to enjoy this video by the end, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Keep track of me on my future videos. And remember, if you guys have any ideas for future video ideas, make sure you let me know in the comments down below what you would like to see, and I will try to get it up to you as soon as I can. And before we start, I would just like to thank this viewer of mine for sending in the idea. So if you happen to see this video, thank you for the idea. So, wasting any more time, let's go into what the 5 games that I believe absolutely deserve a sequel, starting off with this one. Taking the first spot on my list has to go to 2019's Days Gone, which is an action-adventure, open-world, post-apocalyptic title that was developed by Ben Studio and really sits under the publisher of Sony Interactive Entertainment. Now, everything about this game really worked for me. I mean, it had a great cast of characters. I really like the main lead in Deacon St. John, who pretty much acts as a biker, who really is just trying to survive in this kind of broken down and very dangerous Oregon to travel through. And as an open world project, it really had everything you could ask for. It had extensive weapons, different variety of weapons and that you could explore. The swarms are always very difficult to deal with. You actually have to make alliances with different groups of individuals. There were a wide spread of areas that you could explore. You could upgrade your motorcycle, which, trust me, driving throughout this game was actually really, really important. And it had a very, very compelling story that left on a cliffhanger, which is the reason why I expected that there would be a sequel. So it's kind of crazy that, heck, this game has not had any sequel, and it has really gone down as pretty much one of the most underrated games that I've played to some time. Now, I do think that there is still a lot of people who really want to see this game get a sequel, because as early or as recent as 2015, they actually re-released this in a remastered version, and I actually did happen to play that. It was just as fun to play now as it was back then. So yeah, I just think that there's so many elements of this game that really, really work, and because of how the game ended on a cliffhanger and how many elements can easily be improved upon with like the current gen consoles, heck, even maybe the next gen console when they come out in like in a couple years, that I absolutely do believe that Days Gone absolutely deserves to get a sequel. Taking the next spot on my list has to go to 2013's Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Now, as Metal Gear is my all-time favorite video game franchise of all time, I never would have expected that a hack-and-slash action title centered around Raiden taking place 4 years after the events of Metal Gear Solid 4 would actually work. But it did, and it was easily one of the best hack-and-slash games that I've ever played, with not only some really impressive physics cutting mechanics that allowed you to really cut anything that you could actually, interact with, but it actually had one of the best set of soundtracks that I've ever heard in any video game, as well as some really impressive and challenging boss fights. And seeing how we just recently had a remake of Metal Gear Solid 3 in the form of Metal Gear Delta, I really think that it's certainly possible that a potential sequel for this is certainly possible. I mean, heck, if they want to continue going around the stealth department, I mean, heck, they could give it another chop at the action department, and I think a lot of people would totally welcome that, which is why Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance is the next game on my list. Taking the next spot on my list has to go to 2016's Titanfall 2, which is a first-person shooter game developed by Respawn Entertainment and was published by EA. Now, I'm really surprised that they didn't make a sequel to this or try to at least complete the trilogy, because Titanfall 2 is easily in my top 10 favorite first-person shooter games of all time, and as someone who is typically a story campaign-driven gamer, this easily had one of the best multiplayer modes that I had ever experienced. Now, to be fair, Titanfall 2 had a number of major elements that I think worked absolutely well. The campaign centered around the Titan pilot of Jack Cooper, who then kind of makes a bond with a giant mech called a Titan named BT-7274, was absolutely incredible. There were also a number of levels that incorporate a number of gameplay elements that I don't think I've ever seen any other game actually attempt before, and this one did it smoothly. There was a great collection of games, the enemy variety was very, very well, the partner AI with BT was very, very helpful, the enemy AI was very challenging on the harder difficulties, And again, the multiplayer was absolutely extraordinary. So it's really quite puzzling as for why we never got a sequel to this. And when you take into effect that this is the same developer that has given us the Apex Legend franchise, and to this day, they are currently on their 25th season with the current one being titled Prodigy. I mean, there's certain elements of Apex Legends that are absolutely inspired by Titanfall. So I think for us Titanfall fans, we were kind of hoping that a sequel would eventually come out. But as much as I want a sequel, I will acknowledge that Respawn currently busy with, as far as I can tell, 2 other games because they recently just announced a new Star Wars game called Star Wars Zero Company, and we do know that we are getting a sequel to Star Wars Jedi Survivor to complete that trilogy of games. I think, if a sequel were to come out for Titanfall, it probably won't be until after 2027 because next year is going to mark the 10-year anniversary that this game came out. But heck, I think as Titanfall 2 fans really need to keep the faith and hope that a third entry to this awesome franchise comes out, which is why Titanfall 2 is next on my list. Taking the next spot on my list is a game that I'm fairly confident that 95% of you watching this have either never heard of or even played. And all I can say is shame on you for allowing Split Second to absolutely fail, because this racing game is incredible. Now, as opposed to something like a Mario Kart or a Burnout, in terms of you're pretty much kind of crashing into other cars or trying to use weapons to kind of take off the other racers, Split Second's concept is actually built on the idea of creating a fictional reality television show which consists of a number of drivers that actually have weaponized the track itself. As you begin to race through all these tracks and build a power point, you can then actually trigger an environmental hazard to target the other racers. So for example, you can choose to blow up a gas station at an opponent who's ahead of you, or you can bring down a tower and completely change the track itself, or you can call on a plane to crash into the track itself, wiping out all of the racers to give you a better lead. I mean, the concept of weaponizing the track itself is just something I've never heard of before and haven't heard since. And this game came out in 2010. So it's been 15 years since this game came out, and I still love this game so much. I mean, the cars look fantastic, and if you were playing on the PlayStation 3, which means you would earn trophies, the trophies actually get put on your car as like stamps, which I thought was really, really cool. And on top of that, I thought the music was fantastic. And even for a PlayStation 3 game in 2010, this game still looks incredible. This is an incredible looking game. And it just sucks that, scores wise, this game got a lot of really major positive reviews. So like its ratings definitely justify it getting a sequel. But according to, its sales, this game apparently only sold 86,000 copies in the United States in the first 12 days. So yeah, shame on all of you, because Split Second is easily one of the best racing games I've ever played, and it absolutely deserves a sequel, which is why it's number 2 on my list. Taking the final spot on my list has to go to Dead Space 3. Now, personally, Dead Space 2 is my 4th favorite video game of all time, and the Dead Space franchise as a whole is my all-time favorite survival horror franchise of all time. Yeah, even more so than Resident Evil. And while I understand there was a lot of people who were kind of disappointed in how Dead Space 3 turned out in the sense that they made it a co-op game that kind of leaned more into the action environment, I still thought that Dead Space 3 was a pretty well-structured and well-designed game, and it had a very compelling and deep dive story that really went in depth in terms of the origins of the marker and, how everything was working, and to the part where we actually went to the marker homeworld. And with the DLC content, it actually left on a cliffhanger with the infection reaching Earth. Now, if you've played all of these games up to this point, these infections either happened on another planet, or a space station, or a mining rig, but they had never gotten to Earth. So I really felt that with that cliffhanger, it showing us that the infection had not gotten to Earth, I really felt that the stakes were absolutely going to hit its maximum. And I do believe that despite Dead Space 3 kind of going more into action a little bit, there were still plenty of horror elements of Dead Space that I thought worked pretty well. And I do believe that a Dead Space 4 could have easily readjusted the tone of that game and pushed it more back into horror. And heck, they just released Dead Space 1 remake that came out, I believe, last year, and heck, that remake was fantastic, easily better than the original, and that's something that a lot of people don't say when it comes to remaking classic games. So I do believe that there is still very much a solid interest and a strong enough fan base to warrant a conclusion to the Dead Space story, because I just don't like it when great stories to great franchises end on a cliffhanger and then it's never concluded. So if we are to get one more sequel, I would absolutely love a Dead Space 4, at least to give the franchise a solid conclusion for me and the rest of the fan base to enjoy, which is why Dead Space 3 is the last game on my list that absolutely deserves a sequel. And those are my 5 games that I personally believe absolutely deserve a sequel. So, now that you guys know my 5 games, I would like to know, what are 5 video games that you believe absolutely deserve a sequel? Let me know in the comments down below. And like always, thank you guys for watching. You're awesome, and I'll catch you guys next time.